Welcome to the fourth week of our summer series, Finding Meaning in a Meaningless World. In this series, we've been exploring the book of Ecclesiastes, some of the wisdom literature that's found in the Bible. This is a book written by King Solomon, the king who God blessed to be the wisest man who has ever lived. And he begins this book after introducing himself with the words, "Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless." He's then been working his way through experiments, trying to find what are the things that actually bring meaning to this world and to our lives. Because meaning is something that we all hope for. Meaning is something we all want to find for our lives, something to live for, a reason for what we do. And so Solomon has been performing experiments. He's tried wisdom, he's tried pleasure, he's tried work, and spoiler alert from the last couple of weeks, none of them have worked. Before we continue on to the next of his experiments today, I want to just share two things to help us understand Ecclesiastes. First is a saying that I learnt when I was younger, and I always thought it was a proverb, but I've never been able to find it again. But regardless, it's still good wisdom. And it says this: a wise person learns from their mistakes. A wiser person learns from the mistakes of others. The reason that Ecclesiastes is part of the wisdom literature in the Bible is because God is giving us an opportunity to learn from Solomon. We don't have to make the same mistakes. We don't have to walk the same path because it has already been walked. It has already been trodden. Solomon had more wisdom, more money, more work, more responsibilities, and more problems than we could ever imagine. He has tested these things to the very end conclusion, and he's found that it is all just meaningless. So we don't have to do it again. We can learn from him, and we can find our own way. Second thing is this: the book of Ecclesiastes, like all of the Bible, it has to be read in context, because you can hear those words, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. And we can completely miss the point, which is when we try and live a life apart from God, everything is meaningless. Following these other ideas without God, it doesn't work. God is the one that brings meaning to our pleasure. He's the one who brings meaning to wisdom. He is the one who brings meaning to the work that he gives us as a gift. So with those two things in mind, let's jump into the next experiment of Solomon. It comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 4 to 8. "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business." Solomon has considered wisdom, pleasure, and work, but this time he's looking at something a little bit more abstract. He's moving from external motivations. Can we find meaning in the things outside of ourselves to internal motivations? Is meaning found in the reasons why I do what I do? And so he looks at two motivations that share a common theme. He looks at envy and obsession. But he learns that envy is meaningless. Solomon has looked at the history of his people. He's watched them going about their lives in Jerusalem. He's considered his own life, his own motivations as well. He's looked at all these things and seen what actually motivates people. What drives people to achieve and to strive? The thing that is wanting them to do better is envy. We look at the people around us and we think, why can they do that? I want to be able to do that. Why do they get that thing when I've got to make do with this? Why do they get to buy a new phone every year and I've got to make do with this one from 1990? But they are indestructible. I want to prove myself to them because I want to prove that I'm worthy and valuable. I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't have ever really considered myself to be an envious person until I read Solomon's words and I saw that envy is tied up with achievement and ambition. But so often in my life, I strive and I push so much more than I thought that I would be able to just to achieve, simply because I want to be able to prove that I can do things just as well as other people, or better. Now, I don't need to gloat about it. I don't need to rub it in other people's faces most of the time. But I just see other people's achievements and it makes me feel like I need to do better, that I want to be better. And there were so many times at school where I pushed myself to achieve great things and good things. But really, the only reason I was doing that was because I wanted to do better than my siblings who had already gone through. And once I had achieved what they had achieved or surpassed it, it didn't matter anymore. It was meaningless. It didn't count. Now, I understand that you might be looking at me right now and thinking, well, he's a little bit petty. In my defense, I'm a youngest child. It comes with the territory. But what about you? Would you say that you are an envious person? Would you say that you allow envy to drive you to strive and to do great things? What about your reactions when you see people posting on social media their highlight reels? You know, those amazing holidays or their successes at work, or just that casual photo or selfie that just happens to show this beautifully clean house behind them, and you know that they've got kids, and how does that even work? People post their unreality that's made perfect through camera angles and filters, and we see these things and we forget that that's not real life, and so we feel envious because our lives don't match up. Because envy is not just restricted to one thing. We can be envious about finance or promotions. We can be envious about clean houses or relationships, academics, skills, gardens. Maybe even as parents, we can look at other people taking me time and go, but why can't I have that? Why can't I have that time to myself? Because that's just not the season that I'm in right now. There are so many reasons that envy rears its ugly head in our lives. And as Solomon points out, envy can be a powerful and a good motivator. So many achievements happen because we're competitive, because of rivalry, because of envy. It pushes us, it forces us to leave our comfort zone. And sometimes it leads to achievement, but also sometimes it leads to destruction and failure. Envy causes us to overreach with our finances, to live beyond our means, and gets us into trouble. It causes us to take chances we wouldn't normally take just because we want to fit in, because we want to be like those people that we see. And it is meaningless. It's meaningless because it's born from our discontent. We look at somebody else's life and all of a sudden we're no longer satisfied with the life that God has given us. We feel that something is missing. We feel that something is broken in us. Something is wrong with us because what they have or what they do, they just do it so much better. They make things look so easy. You know, they go around to somebody's house and they just automatically step in. They know how to help. They don't have to ask. I just stand there on the side waiting, hoping that somebody's going to tell me what to do, but I just don't know how to step in. They know how to care for other people so well. Why can't I be like that? We find these places of discontent, and then things lose their meaning. We lose the joy that is meant to come with life. Envy comes out of this lack of satisfaction that we have in ourselves and who God made us to be. And that is the reason that Solomon says envy is meaningless. Because envy forces us and causes us to abandon what God has for us, what he wants for us. But there's something else, another motivation that Solomon points out as being meaningless in verse 8. It says this: there was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Solomon's trying to tell us that obsession is meaningless. Rather than with envy, where he spoke in general terms, here he gives us a specific example. This is someone who is alone. They've got no family, no son, no brother. There's no other person for them to share life with in a deep way. But his eyes are not content with his wealth. He is striving and striving and striving. He needs more. He needs to fill that thing inside, so he needs more. So he keeps on working. He keeps striving and seeking and wanting. And Solomon talks about wealth in this example, but this isn't just about being a workaholic. This isn't just an obsession with wealth or with work. This is when anything becomes an obsession. This obsession could be the desire you have to be needed, to be wanted. And so you're never out of a relationship with other people. You're always pursuing a boyfriend or a girlfriend. You're obsessed, and that obsession actually stops you from looking deeper at what's going on inside. It might be an obsession for shopping, for finding bargains, or an obsession for learning new skills so that you will be valuable, so that you can prove that you can do so many things. Or it could be a variety of different things. And the trouble with obsessions is that they take all of our focus. We pour so much into them that we ignore the other important things in our lives that need attention. Because an obsession, even when you're not actually doing it, you're thinking about it. You're mulling it over in your mind. You're waiting to get back to it so that you can keep toiling at it. And in Solomon's example, this man was all alone. He had no family. He had no brother or son. He didn't have anyone to share life with because of the obsession. He wasn't able to focus on other people. He might have once had family. He might have once had brothers around him, but the obsession drove them away. And just like envy, the issue at the core of this is discontent. It is about feeling like there is something missing when we look at the people around us. Something is not right. So we want to fill that hole. We want to fill that thing that's missing inside. And so we use that thing that we're obsessing over, and we think the more that we can put in, the better it will be. And an obsession is anything that we focus on and try and use to compulsively fill that hole. Obsession develops after we've allowed that discontent, that envy to sit deep in our heart and in our souls. An obsession, it makes us deaf to the whispers of God. It makes us deaf to what he's trying to tell us, until eventually, if God wants to get our attention, he has to shout. It's why so many people realize that their lives are meaningless when they encounter a crisis, because God uses that opportunity to get their attention. God's wanting us to do what this man did, to ask, why am I toiling? Why am I going without enjoyment for this? But we need to make sure that when that realization comes, there's time for us to deal with it. There's time to deal with the real thing that is meaningless, which is discontent. Now, I will just say, not all discontent is bad. Sometimes God uses discontent to raise us up. He stirs our souls up about something because he is wanting us to do something about it. Big things that I can think of. The abolition of slavery happened because God raised a discontent in somebody's heart about what was going on. The Reformation came about because of a discontent about what the church was doing. These things are good. Poverty is dealt with in small scale and large scale because God places a discontent in people's hearts. Discontent isn't always bad, but discontent separated from God is. When we give ourselves over to the discontent that comes from this world, that the one that comes because we stop looking at the things that God is calling us to do in this world, and instead to look at what the people around us are doing. When we look at them and say, but I don't do that. I can't do that. I don't have a house like that. I don't have a new car like that. I'm not as smart as them or as kind as them or as good looking as them. When we compare ourselves, that discontent is what is meaningless. But we compare ourselves because we feel like we are missing something inside. So we try to fill it in every way that we can. So what's the answer here? How do we actually find meaning in this meaningless life? Because if envy, if obsession are the outworkings of this discontent, they cause us to toil without end and achieve, maybe the answer is we just stop. Maybe the answer is that we don't toil, we don't achieve, because if it all comes from that, Solomon gives us the answer in verses 5 and 6. He says, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Solomon starts off by saying, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Don't even think about just trying to stop. Don't think about just trying to give up, to not try or work or strive. God has created us to do those things. God has created us to work, to strive. He's created us to achieve. He intends those things for us. Work, as Blake said last week, is a gift from God. Just giving up is not the answer. Instead, Solomon tells us one handful with tranquility is better than two handfuls with toil. Now, in Hebrew, the word for one handful is different from the word for two handfuls, and not just because one's a plural and the other isn't. They actually describe two very different hand actions. So let me describe it this way. Imagine that you're at a party, and I know that it's probably not very COVID safe, but there's a bowl of chips out for people to grab. If you go over to that bowl of chips, the one handful is reaching in and just grabbing a couple of chips. You don't make a mess. You've got enough to keep you content. You've got enough to munch politely as you talk to people. You've got one hand free to eat the chips with, and if you make a mess, you can pick up the pieces. You are working. You are achieving. It is an appropriate amount. But two handfuls is an image of greed. It is this image of cupped hands trying to get everything they can. And it is like you coming along to that bowl of chips and just digging both hands in and getting as many chips as you can. But as you pull your hands out, bits and pieces are going to fall out of that bowl. They're going to fall out of your hands, and you've actually got no way of eating them. Well, not without everybody else at the party looking at you like you're a disgusting pig, because all you can do. See, the two handfuls is this image of greed. You can't actually keep what you have, and yet you want more than what you need. And we're told here, if we want to find meaning in this meaningless world, we need to learn to be content. It makes sense, right? It's so very hard to do. And every time that I feel like I get the balance of this right, that I've learned to be content about everything in my life, something comes along and it upsets the apple cart. I fall right back into discontentment. I fall right back into looking at the people around me and comparing myself to them. Philippians 4:10-13 is a famous passage of scripture that Paul wrote while he was in prison, and it says this: I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Paul didn't just immediately become content when he encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. When we accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior, it's not like the light bulb goes on and all of a sudden we go, I'm content. It would be nice. We have to learn to be content. Paul learned to be content despite trips to prison, despite good things and bad. He learned to be content in situations that I hope I never have to face. But if Paul learnt how to do it in those situations, then that gives me hope that I can learn it for my life as well. So if we want to learn to be content like Paul, what do we have to do? Well, the first thing is we have to learn to refocus. Discontentment happens when we see other people as rivals and as competition. When we spend our lives comparing ourselves to others and we allow those lies that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough to creep in. Discontentment comes from comparison, and then it tries to urge us on. So if we want to break that cycle, we have to learn to refocus. Ephesians 2:10 reminds us that God has created each and every one of us here in this room with care and concern, but he has also created us to do good works. He has works that he intends me to do. He has works that he intends you to do. And God isn't wanting you to do mine or me to do yours. Instead, we have to learn to refocus our attention on what God is calling us to do in our own lives. When we start to go down that rabbit hole of comparison, when we feed that hole of discontent in our heart, we have to stop those thoughts. We have to take those thoughts and ideas captive. We have to redirect our eyes back to the race set before us. Put the big horse blinkers on so that we stop looking at the people on either side of us. Stop staring at Scott Yowie. Stop looking at his skill with the keyboard, because quite honestly, I'm not built to make pretty sounds in music. That's not my gift. That's not the work that God is calling me to do. Instead, he's calling me to encourage people, to get people excited about God, to teach people. I've got to keep my eyes focused on my race, not on Scott's, not on anyone else's. And you know, we will fail at this. That's why we have to learn to be content. It is a process. We have to continually retrain ourselves and refocus, to shift our gazes back to our own lanes. And sometimes this actually means we need to reevaluate our priorities. You know what? They've got a beautiful deck for entertaining. They've got a wood-fired pizza oven. They've got all these wonderful things. But as cool as it would be to have that, I don't need that. I'm not built for having lots of people around at my house to entertain. I like catching up with people in coffee shops, one-on-one. I don't need that. I don't need the big, expensive car that would look great in the driveway, but I know that I'm not going to be able to take care of it. I just need something simple. I don't need that new degree or that doctorate, even if Dr. Yowie does sound pretty great. Instead, I just need to focus on what God's calling me to do now. We have to shift our gazes back to our lane. Second thing that we learn from Paul is we need to practice gratitude. I don't know how many times in Paul's letters that he actually stops and expresses gratitude. Gratitude to God for the church, or just gratitude to God for his faithfulness. This is one of the ways that Paul has taught himself to refocus. When he starts to look at his circumstances, when he starts to obsess, going, I need to be back outside, I need to be planting churches and spreading the gospel, I need to be visiting these churches that I've planted. Or when he starts to envy those people that come to visit him, I wish I could come and go as they are, that I could get out of this prison. When he allows that discontentment to start, he shifts his focus to gratitude. He looks for the good things that God has given him in his life. He looks for the good things around him. He breaks out of the viewpoint of woe is me, of other people as competition, and instead, let's focus on the blessings. Let's thank God for what he's doing in that person. Let's thank God for what he's doing in me. Try it. Next time you find yourself going down that road of envy or obsession, stop, look around, and ask yourself, what am I grateful for? Ask God to bless the other person and what they're doing for him, and at the same time, remind yourself of your calling. Remind yourself of the race that God has set before you, and thank God for it. And the last thing that we learn from Paul about being content is this: we need to cling to Jesus. Now, we need to cling to Jesus at all times, but when the discontentment in our lives is strong, when we feel that envy rise up in us and we try to be grateful, we try to refocus our attention, but it just keeps rising. Why can't my life just be easy like theirs is? When we're in that place, this is when we need to remember to cling to Jesus. Paul tells us in verses 12 to 13, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Paul has learned the secret of contentment. He can do it only because of Jesus. Jesus gives us strength when we feel we have no strength. He gives us help when we feel helpless. He is the anchor for our souls. And Jesus destroys the chain of envy. He destroys the chains of obsession, of meaningless discontentment. Why? Because the lies of those things are, I have to work to earn to be valuable. I have to strive to gain the value that I need and that I want. To gain those things that I want in my life, I have to strive for them and push for them. And it's all about my effort. If I want them, I have to put my blood, sweat, and tears into them. And Jesus looks at us, possibly with a look of confusion on his face, as he says, I've already done the work. I've already paid the price. I have redeemed you at great cost. I have called you by name because you're valuable to me. I have got freedom and meaning here for you. You don't have to earn it. This is a gift. All you have to do is receive it. All you've got to do is accept it. Jesus destroys and smashes the pattern of earning because he gives us the greatest gift of all. When we cling to Jesus, when we keep returning to him with all that we are, we find that discontentment doesn't stick. Because he's given us salvation, the greatest thing that we ever could get. And we don't have to work for it. We don't have to strive for it. We don't have to earn it. We don't have to envy other people for it or obsess over it. We are given it freely as a gift. Why do I need to toil and give up my enjoyment when I've already got all that I need? Now, I will still work. I will still achieve things. I will still strive. But I'm no longer going to do it to prove myself. I'm no longer going to do it to fill that hole inside. Instead, I'm going to do it with joy. I'm going to do it with gladness and thanksgiving, because the curse is broken and meaning is found that God has intended for us. A single handful with tranquility. We find contentment, a contentment that comes from Jesus. We don't have to strive for it. We don't earn it. We are given it as a gift. But we've got to learn to sit in that place. We forget sometimes and we go back to what we used to know. So we need to refocus. But when we cling to Jesus, when we allow him to give us that contentment, we find meaning in this meaningless world.